Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to the Monday, August 18th edition of Intelligence Report with shrinkformen.com and of voiceformen.com. I, as always, am Dean Esmay, Operations Manager of A Voice for Men. With me, as per usual, is Dr. Tara Palmatier, noted psychologist and redhead. Say hi to everybody, Dr. T.
Hi, everyone.
And also Paul Elam, the notorious publisher and founder of A Voice for Men. How you doing today, Paul?
Greetings and salutations.
So we missed last week due to health issues on my end. The good news is, if anybody cares, I'm getting some dental work, so by November I'll have a nice smile. In the meantime, we have a lot to talk about today, but we can hardly not talk about the story that everybody in the news is buzzing about, which is Ferguson, Missouri. As I see it, Nixon has called in the National Guard to quell race riots. How does it feel to be a teenager again, Paul?
It feels very nostalgic. You know, I was always a big believer in Nixon, that well, when people get out of place and voice objection too loudly, the first thing you do is call in men with guns, and you sort it out later, and that seems to be what's happening now.
And not just ordinary guns, military grade weaponry.
Oh yeah, I mean, seriously, I mean, tear gas isn't enough. Let's just bring in the tanks and the bombs. Why don't we? I mean, drone strikes, I think, should be next. Really, what are they waiting for? Okay, in case anybody's not paying attention, we're all being sarcastic now. To be honest, the more I read about what's going on in Ferguson, the more I realize I just don't know what's going on in Ferguson. The latest news that I hear is that that Governor Nixon, yes, that's his name, Nixon, not Richard, has actually pulled in the National Guard, but has lifted the curfew, which seems like the oddest thing I've ever heard. So the National Guard will be patrolling the streets that are still theoretically full of people. For some reason, this strikes me as a bad idea, although apparently the presence of the National Guard is causing some protesters to say, well, we'll just stay home then. This is all very disturbing. But the truth is, we don't know what happened with Michael Brown or the cop who shot him, but it certainly doesn't look very good for the cop, to be honest with you.
Well, we do know that he got shot several times, and we know that
not the cop.
He's dead.
Michael Brown was shot 6 times, 4 in the arm, twice in the face. The private autopsy specialist, forensic autopsy professional, who actually waived his $10,000 fee to fly in from New York, said that Michael Brown could have survived the first 4 shots, but it was the kill shot to the top of the head that was fatal. It also, according to this, the forensic, the news item I read on this today, he said that the wounds were indicative that he had his arms raised, because they were the wounds on the arms were on the inside, and that the kill shot was up towards the top of the head, which means that his head may have been facing down, but you know, who knows?
I normally I'm one to sit back and say, let's all wait till we have all the evidence before we jump to any conclusions. But you know, the fact is that the cops and the National Guards were also making or at least the cops were making efforts to keep reporters out of the area. That's right. Which is a nice way of saying, okay, we'll let you know what we think you should know when we decide you should know it, which is already bothersome as hell. I am actually stunned. I grew up on the south side of Chicago in the 70s and saw me some race riots, but I haven't seen any in, well, we did have some in the 90s, didn't we? But
Hollywood, Florida.
Yeah, no, and then there was some stuff over Rodney King and all that.
Yeah.
there's people who decry what is so-called identity politics, but I got to tell you, when you're nothing but if you're black and living in a poor area and you see nothing but white people in authority and they're shooting down your kids dead, I don't see how you could not start to feel some anger and resentment. I had an essay I wrote today that lightly touched on this. I'm not condoning anything that has happened. I'm not saying anything's right. I'm not even pronouncing that this officer is guilty, although it doesn't really look very good for him. It looks like I don't know what explanation you can have for 6 shots fired at an unarmed man.
It seems excessive. I mean, it is excessive, I think.
Trigger control training. What? I mean, I just 6 shot fired. I mean, that sounds like wild firing to me. And the reports are conflicting. There's evidence that he was involved in a robbery, that Michael Brown was involved in a robbery, yet he has no kind of criminal record or even a trouble history of being arrested for things. There's conflicting reports as to whether the cop had even heard about the supposed robbery beforehand. We don't know. I just don't know, A, how you get here with 6 shots fired at an unarmed man right in the front. Where's your taser, officer? Where's your pepper spray? And why did this happen? And I do see I'll just say it, a bunch of dumbass white people are already rallying around this officer, like, let's protect him, when you don't know whether what he did was right or not. But at the same time, I guess he does need to be protected at least until we know what happened. His family doesn't deserve any reprisals. It's a whole big fucking mess. And to me, what it all boils down to is something I said today on the front page of A Voice for Men, which is that when you have a large group of people who have no good reason to trust the system and no good reason to trust the state, eventually that anger boils out, and they either say fuck it to the whole system, or they rise up and get violent and nasty.
Well, let me add something to that, Dean, too, that I think it needs to be said in this. And I know it'll probably upset some people, but one, I agree, we don't need to rush to any conclusions. But I don't think that 6 bullets on an unarmed man, that there being something wrong with that picture, is rushing to a conclusion. I think that is looking at what's right in front of you and saying, you know what, something's wrong with this picture. Now, what is actually wrong with it, what happened behind it, does remain to be seen, and I think that should be investigated, and we should find answers. But when you look at what's happening in Ferguson, and you look at what's happening in minority communities throughout the United States, there's a couple of things that you have to take for granted, and this is where I'm probably going to piss some ersatz conservatives off. I really don't care. When you have a war on drugs, like the one waged in the United States, which is essentially a war on minority, I can promise you, there is a neighborhood just a few miles from here, from where I live, where the properties go for about $1.5 million per lot. I can promise you there is a boatload of cocaine in that community behind closed doors, and marijuana and other drugs. I can also promise you that you will never, ever see cops kicking in the doors with warrants that they secured at 3 o'clock in the morning from friendly judges, so that they go bash the doors in and go deal with the drug problem.
Once every couple of years,
baby. Is a war on people that don't have money to defend themselves, and it is primarily waged in minority communities, where when you talk about those communities coming to a place where they don't trust authority, you can look at that as a major reason why, and you can see the same thing with the artifacts of the Violence Against Women Act, when you see the primary aggressor laws, when mandatory arrest laws come into play in domestic disputes, and the cops show up and answer the door. Just arresting the guy is as easy as it can possibly be in a minority community. And this is another reason that there is no trust. I mean, don't even address all the poverty, the joblessness, the lack of prospects for the future, the feeling of disenfranchisement. The fact of the matter is that our laws, primarily in the form of the War on Drugs and on the Violence Against Women Act, are geared to go in and create chaos and imprison people in black and other minority communities. And now we gun the guy down with his hands in the air, his head down. The fact that this has not exploded into more is absolutely shocking to me.
And this isn't the first time. I read another article this weekend. Same police department, Ferguson, arrested a suspect. As it turned out, they had the wrong man. His name is Henry Davis. He sued the police department, and it was dismissed, but he's appealing now. When they put him into a holding cell, a female officer, they pushed him down onto the ground. A female officer straddled his back, and then the other officers beat him so severely that even the cops said, okay, we got to get him medical attention. He insisted on being photographed before he would get into the ambulance, so he had evidence of what had happened to him. And then, okay, arrested, brought in the wrong guy, beat him senseless for no good reason, and then they charged him a fine for destruction of city property for bleeding on their uniforms. I mean,
well, that was mighty fucking inconsiderate of him, wasn't it?
Don't you think? Yeah. So his
did he bruise anybody's knuckles with his face while he was at it? I mean,
yeah. So I mean, it sounds like this is a police department that this isn't their first act of excessive force. This one is, of course, deadly and fatal.
Well, if he tried to move while that female officer was straddling his back, that could be a sexual assault too. So let's not rule out the possibility that this guy is not only a destructive bleeder on Police Universe, that he's probably a pervert too.
It's an interesting aside that Darren Wilson reports have surfaced that about his mother, who died when he was 16. Darren Wilson
being the shooter.
Darren Wilson is the officer, is the shooter. His mother was a serial con artist and grifter who stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from their neighbors back when Darren Wilson was a teenager, through intercepting their mail, getting their ID, opening credit card accounts in their names, taking out loans in her neighbors' names with their information. Never did any jail time, but instead filed bankruptcy, and then died under mysterious circumstances when he was 16. It was never released what the cause of death was. I'm not saying this means that he is a sociopathic grifter like his mother, but I think it adds to an interesting bit of psychology to the case. If the news reports I read are true, perhaps this guy went gung ho in the opposite direction. I don't know, but the thing is, I think that we need to have a full investigation before a rush to judgment is made. Yes, the problem is that I don't trust our system to police itself. I don't trust the fox that snuck into the hen house to adequately police itself.
Yeah,
I just don't.
That's the grand problem, isn't it? I want to know more, and yet at the same time, I no longer trust the system myself, and I furthermore no longer trust the press.
No.
So I'm like,
yes, that would be. I don't trust the Fox News in the hen house.
I don't trust MSNBC in the hen house either.
MSNBC, CNN. I don't trust any of them anymore. With
the Washington Post.
Well, the shit we've seen out of once respectable outlets like the Washington Post and Time Magazine, why would you trust anybody in this situation? I will make a couple of points. My usual thing for the quote miners, no, we did not just suggest that Michael Brown was involved in the drug trade or wife beating. The point is that things like the war on drugs and the so-called Violence Against Women Act are really a war on poor men and a war and a violence against, they're both wars on poor men is what they are. My only exception to Paul, and it's one that sometimes gets me in trouble, is that there are literally white communities where this same shit is happening. Their main problem is that they're poor.
I don't disagree with that at all. I think it's disproportionate in minority communities, but it's certainly where there's no money for lawyers, where there's no money to raise a stink to protect your constitutional rights, that's exactly where the state goes to violate them.
That's exactly it. And things like the war on drugs and violence are frequently used as the excuse. Let's clean up this drug problem in this little trailer trash community over here by walking in with our, kicking in doors and whomping on people with nightsticks and shooting. Ah, he was out to get me! Shoot, shoot, shoot! I don't know. It's scary, and the care about due process and civil rights in this country that comes from groups that are supposed to protect civil rights just astounds me. And I'll make another point that I made today on the front page of AVFM, which is this. Stuff like what's going down in Ferguson is getting national attention because of the racial element. But I have been in predominantly black cities, and I have watched black cops mistreat black youth exactly. Well, I haven't seen any cops shoot anybody down. But I have seen black cops treating black kids like total shit. And something like what happened in Ferguson, if that had been an all-black city with black cops and black judges and black lawyers, could have still gone all down exactly like that, and we wouldn't be seeing national news. I ultimately think it's about poverty and disenfranchisement, even though race is clearly an issue. Just my opinion. But it's still about young men, isn't it?
Yep.
Because it's about targeting young men.
Guys, that has come in, as we are wont to do, somewhat, I think, of a dissenting opinion, but I think we should have a chance to hear this person out and go ahead and see what they have to say. I'll read it to you. I don't care what the demographic is. If they're threatening or erupting into violence against innocent targets every time anything happens to one of their own, then I don't want to live near them. I really don't care what precipitates that violence. If they're directing it at innocents who have nothing to do with the issue, actually, to take it a step further, how can that group coexist in a larger society? Don't they realize the damage they're doing to their own interest? They're destroying any public goodwill or sympathy. Bear in mind, I'm not saying anything about the incident itself, just the current response to it. I don't care what rationalizations they have for their behavior, it's wrong. And that comes to us from Nady J, 11.
Nady J, you're not entirely wrong, but you're not entirely right either. I don't care. I just don't want to be near people who act that attitude. There may be more people like that near you than you think. I mean, yeah, you're right. I don't want to open up a convenience store in an area where I know people will use it as an excuse to come break it down and steal my shit and break my windows. I get that. I really do. But here I'm talking like a classic 70s liberal. If you aren't looking at the root causes of the issue, you're never going to fix it now, are you? That's the only point I'm going to make, because you can leave and go live somewhere where you think it's safe, but that shit can follow you. I've seen it. I've seen good neighborhoods go bad.
Well, look, rich people have the stuff that you want to steal and sell. So maybe instead of building more gated communities, we should focus on, I don't know, improving educational opportunities for boys and girls, particularly boys in disadvantaged communities, boys where fatherlessness is rampant. I don't know, just a thought.
I'm gonna take it a step further. out on the limb here, and I'm going to say I couldn't disagree more with that commenter. Respectfully so. I mean, I think certainly I understand Dean's perspective that if I'm going to set up a business, I'm probably not going to choose a place where I think it might get burned down within the next year. I think that's pragmatism, not prejudice. But here's the deal. I mean, this isn't sounding like a classic 70s liberal. To me, Dean sounded like a pragmatist. If you put a dog in a corner long enough and kick it, it's going to come out biting. That is the nature of things in life. It's just reality. And to sit here and say, well, I don't care if people are kicking you and kicking you and kicking you and kicking you. The moment you come out biting, you've lost my support. Well, that sounds like a license to keep kicking to me. That sounds like a license to keep doing what you're doing. So with all respect, I appreciate the sentiment that self-destructive behavior does not help people that are in bad straits, and I agree with that. But I also say that, I mean, my God, if you're running around arresting every other black man in sight on something, whether it's for selling a dime bag or whether it's because his girlfriend says he smacked me 3 weeks ago, I just forgot to report it till today, or because he happens to be driving while black in a white neighborhood, which does still happen. You know, whether you want to admit it or not, that shit happens. If you don't want to admit it, I think you're in the ranks of the terminally in denial. But the fact of the matter is, when you inflict injustice on a group of people long enough, you're going to get a bad result. Any history book cracked open for more than about 2 minutes is going to start giving you examples of people who did more with less provocation than minority blacks have in this country. So, well, I appreciate the sentiment of Nady's comment there. I just don't think it washes in the real world.
At some point, and I do think this relates to many of the other things you talk about, when you have a large group of people who simply feel they cannot trust the state, they cannot trust the community, they cannot trust pretty much anybody, in many cases not their churches, not their own families, you're going to get this kind of chaos. You just are. And I think we're going to see it in other areas, and I don't think it's all going to be racial. I've made this prediction before, and I'll make it again. When I think it's very easy for the powers that be to divide us up by race. When men start to see that, you know, Michael Brown would not have been killed if he were a black woman. Yes, the fact that he was black was a big contributor. The fact that he was male was probably a bigger contributor. They would not have shot down a black woman unless she was brandishing a weapon and maybe not even brandishing a machine gun and maybe not even fucking men. And when men start to figure out that a lot of this is actually based in misandry and not race, or that race is only like a secondary cause here, a lot of stuff is going to change. This kid was killed for being male as well as for being black. I mean, there's just, that's how I see it anyway. Yes, it's both. Okay, I'm not saying, I'm not an idiot. Race plays into this. Although I honestly think if his father was a lawyer and his mother was a doctor and he was living in $1 million mansion, it wouldn't have gone down this way. But I don't know, I'm getting...
You probably wouldn't have had as much to protest, but I'll tell you something else to tag on to that, Dean, is that I think that when civil rights groups, particularly addressing those concerns of African Americans, start figuring out how much of this stuff is based on gender and not just race, then we can count on them getting rid of exploitive asshats like Al Sharpton and his Tawana Brawley crew. Get them off the scene and get some real civil rights leaders.
Yes, we're treating underprivileged young men of all races, underprivileged, we'll use this phrase underprivileged, young men as a problem to be solved or if nothing else, by warehousing them, i.e. incarceration, rather than people who need our compassion and respect. No, that doesn't mean that the looters and the vandals did the right thing. That's not going to help anything. It's not even 100% clear that the dead young man here had done nothing. But I don't know. I find it not surprising that we're seeing this reaction in Ferguson. I'm just not surprised. I'm disappointed. I mean, I grew up in a very racially segregated and very racist part of Chicago, the South Side of Chicago in the 1970s, and I really thought by this stage in my life, all that crap would be behind us. Whoops, guess it's not. It pisses me off. But I am going to go with Paul. Things like the Violence Against Women Act and the war on drugs used by poor men are the primary culprits here, because it leaves the police not protecting and serving the citizenry. It leaves them looking for excuses to beat down doors and arrest people, arrest young men mostly. So that's how I see it. Anybody got anything else they want to say on that?
Let us hope for a fair investigation and consequences where wrongdoing is found.
And to segue, let's hope it's an investigation that is not similar to what happens in college sexual assault cases.
I will say that I very much hope that this officer, whatever he did and whyever he did it, sees justice, and I hope reprisals against his family do not occur, because they didn't do a damn thing wrong here. And yeah, violence and looting, while it may not shock me, is not going to help anything or anybody. Okay, what else did we have up to talk about here today, Paul? Because I lost.
Now that you have nuked Dr. T's segue.
That's okay, just talk on over me.
I forgot what our story list was. Dr. T, what's next now?
A young gentleman who was denied due process at Drew University in, I believe, the wonderful state of New Jersey. Its super fair family court system. So yes, Kevin Parisi was a student at Drew University who was accused of sexually assaulting a young woman who is now a professional athlete. The news article did not disclose her name or what sport she is a professional athlete in. On just her accusation alone, he was barred from campus, barred from his dormitory, only allowed to take classes. Apparently, they had been somewhat friendly. He woke up from a nap one afternoon. She was sitting on his desk and said she had just broken up with his girlfriend. They talked. He invited her into his bed. She said yes. He claims he asked her several times during the sexual encounter, and she gave consent. And the day after, or actually immediately after, according to the article I read in the Washington Examiner, she made him promise not to tell her boyfriend because, you know, he might get mad that she slept with this other guy. Then her friend called him and made him promise not to tell her boyfriend, and she called the next day, and then she ended up telling her boyfriend and claimed it was a rape. And then her boyfriend at the time filed police charges. Meanwhile, the police dismissed the case. After 3 months, the university did. This young man had a pre-existent anxiety condition and suffered panic attacks. His physical and mental health deteriorated during this whole process. And now he is suing his former university for the way they handled the case. I hope he wins. He's also suing the woman for making false allegations and her boyfriend for corroborating her false allegations in civil court, and I hope he wins all of his suits.
And he is one of about 30 now. I think there's an estimated 30 pending lawsuits right now against different universities for denial of due process using the terms under the Dear Colleague letter that proof basically doesn't mean shit, that if somebody points a finger, there's a damn good chance you're guilty, and we're going to proceed from there. And now they're starting to get their asses sued, which I think is both hysterical and quite righteous.
Exactly right. His lawyers, I'll read a short excerpt from the article. His lawyers, Solomon Rubin, Andrew Miltenberg, and Kimberly Lau, who are representing at least 3 of the 30 men who have filed lawsuits, say they get multiple phone calls every week from college students whose due process rights were violated after being accused of sexual assault on campus. Unlike Parisi, however, most are found guilty by their universities.
And so, yeah, great. And still, though, most of them not found guilty by the law.
Mm-hmm. That's it. That's if criminal charges are even filed against these young men,
which they frequently aren't.
That's correct, because I think the ones who don't make criminal charges with their local police department should be automatically suspect of being false accusers.
Yep.
Frankly.
I do too. Especially.
And I don't think a university should take any of these reports seriously unless the woman in question has filed a proper criminal report. Period. End of story.
Don't you understand that 3 out of 2 women are raped on college campuses every day? I mean.
Yeah, that's right. That's why so many families are sending their little princess cupcake snowflakes off to college every fall. Please, if you really think that college campuses are that dangerous, what parents in their right minds would send their daughters off to school? Right.
Or why wouldn't you send them to an all-girls school, or just make them go to online academy?
Because
hell no.
Those parents are a part of rape culture. They know how dangerous it is on campuses, and that is why they're sending.
That must be it. That's right, because they want to teach their daughters a lesson.
Exactly.
That must be what's going on, because our rape culture encourages and normalizes the rape of young women. So obviously parents are sending their girls to college so they'll get raped, and I can't even continue this line of reasoning. It's so batshit insane. And then I just remember being on a news segment with somebody recently when I was questioning these statistics, and I was accused of saying women lie about rape.
Some women do.
Well, of course some
women do.
Of course some of them do. But more to the point, this isn't even about that. Because this is about phony fucking statistics. Mm-hmm. And they're phony as shit.
Yes, they are.
They're transparently phony, and apparently because the letters C, D, C are at the top of them, we're supposed to trust them. You know, trust your government, people. I'm sorry, I'm not an anti-government libertarian. I'm just saying, just trust the CDC. You know, don't even bother asking whether or not there's any political agenda behind them pushing those numbers. Don't bother actually reading the report and looking at how they come up with their ludicrous conclusions. Just accept it because it must be true because the CDC said so. One day we'll have to do a whole show just taking apart why the CDC standards are wrong, but the bottom line is if you believe the CDC's numbers and you use the same methodology as you find out that women are about as likely to rape a boy as vice versa, but of course they just made one little change in the definition so it doesn't look that way.
I think a Mary Koss special is definitely in order and in our foreseeable future.
It starts with Mary Koss. I don't know what her direct involvement is anymore, but it starts with a researcher named Mary Koss in the 1980s, and it has exploded since then. Mm-hmm. And this goes back to all the shit that Erin Pitsey got from the press when in Detroit she referred to feminism as an evil empire. And not a single one of the reporters who scoffed at that actually ever approached her and asked her to explain that reasoning.
Well,
this is part of it right here.
That's why it went from being called, why rape culture back in the 90s was referred to as date rape hysteria. Tell the same lie often enough, over enough time, and here we are 20 years later, and it's gone from date rape hysteria, was acknowledged at the time to be a form of hysteria, to rape culture.
Yeah. And we're living in a rape culture now, supposedly, of women.
One that well, temporarily, but I think you have to keep in mind, and when people don't get the danger of this, one of the things I like to do is refer them back to the case of Caleb Warner. One, what the fuck is a college panel doing investigating a criminal sexual assault? Why is that not law enforcement? These honor courts were set up in colleges to handle matters of academic integrity, plagiarism, test cheating, things like that. They
That's
were
right.
not designed to do criminal trials, but that's exactly what's been put onto them. You look at the case of Caleb Warner at the University of North Dakota, who was accused by someone of sexually assaulting him. The girl did also make a report to the local sheriff's department, which they investigated and found that her story was so lacking in credibility that they issued a warrant for her arrest for filing a false police report, after which she fled the state. The university still, at that point, told Caleb to go screw himself, that as far as they were concerned, he was guilty of sexual assault. And he's standing there saying, wait a minute, there's a warrant for her arrest for lying about it. We don't want to hear that. Get out. You're done. Took him years to get reinstated, finally got reinstated, but by that point, he'd given up on his, imagine that. He gave up on his academic career. He is now driving a delivery truck in North Dakota, making local deliveries with no ambitions of returning to college. This is what we're doing in our universities right now. And when somebody like Aaron Pitsey says that it's an evil empire, reporters go, what?
Yeah. And it all goes back to money. It really does go back to money. By selling these hyperinflated statistics and this rape hysteria, we've gone from date rape hysteria to outright rape hysteria. The people pumping these inflated statistics are getting funding for their rape prevention and their rape crisis services.
And you know what? And you know what their education on prevention of sexual assault is largely comprised of? Hundreds of thousands and hundreds of $1,000s on walk a mile in her shoe campaigns and posters that say, tell men not to rape.
And Dean, I think if you go back on the replay on this, you'll see that you misspoke. Instead of saying rape crisis, you said ripe crisis, but I want to argue that's probably a better term.
Crisis. Okay. But see, eventually...
It is a crisis.
Yes, it is.
Eventually this shit boomerangs, and it has to boomerang at this point. One of two things happen. People figure out, don't send your son to college because it's too dangerous to him, or don't send your daughter to college because it's too dangerous for her. College starts to become irrelevant, and oh, by the way, the universities get their asses sued off. I mean, if something doesn't change soon, I'm seeing a mass implosion on higher education in general. And frankly, at this point, the way the universities are being run, I'm not sure I give a damn. I mean, there's still some good departments and doing some good work. So there's still some decent medical schools, apparently. There's still apparently some good things going on in STEM. But even the feminists are after that, too.
Yeah, I think most university campuses need a giant cockroach bomb to go off, let the gases pass, and then rebuild with saner faculty members.
Somebody quote mine that one, please, and put it out there.
Somebody's going to go in and edit out the word roach out of that one, I'm going to tell you.
I was thinking of like raid.
I know.
Or turn the gender studies building into the Roach Motel.
Well, shutting down the so-called women's studies or gender studies departments as departments in the study of batshit insanity and concentrated hatred would certainly be a really good start on all of that. It really would. So.
And if I could throw my own 2 cents in for the quote miners before we move on to the next subject, I just want to say there are lots of women who lie about rape.
Say that so we don't make the mistake of what you just said. There are lots of women who lie about rape.
Yes.
The
And
question
there are
is
also
which
lots of
one.
women who lie about suffering domestic violence.
It's true. But more to the point, some of those liars are the liars who are compiling these bullshit, total bullshit statistics, because there's money in those bullshit statistics.
So what are they doing? They're lying about rape.
It never ends, does it?
It never ends.
But it will. It's going to. It has to. There's a saying in economics, which is that if a thing can't go on forever, then generally speaking, it won't. And this bullshit can't go on forever. It will have to collapse one way or the other.
I can't wait for the feminist batshit banana pants bubble to burst. That will be fun to watch. I'm gonna sit back.
What?
The feminist batshit banana pants bubble.
Yeah. Oh, we have a question for Dr. T that I don't want to miss before we move on to the next subject, and that is, Dr. T, what kind of characterological personality shit is going on in the heads of false rape claimants?
There's actually quite a bit of research. Most of it stops in the early 2000s, which is when I think there was probably a push in academia to stop researching this. But most of the research that I've read from the 90s and up until about 2002, 2004 implicates the usual suspects in terms of personality disorders in individuals who make false allegations of sexual assault or physical assault. Actually, and if you want the research, go on AVFM, and I think I have the article on Shrink for Men too. It was an article I wrote a few years ago about the actress Polly Perrette called Polly Won a Restraining Order, in which I provide a bibliography of this research. But typically, false accusers, the personality disorders who show up the most in that group are histrionics, borderlines, narcissistic individuals, sociopaths, and paranoid personality disordered individuals. The reasons they make false allegations are because they are attention seeking for financial gain, because they want to punish their target for, like not wanting to date their crazy asses anymore, and or because their target has moved on to a new love interest. So it's the usual suspects. Or they're trying to get out of consequences for something else. Like there was a young woman in the UK who made a false rape report because she was flunking out of school due to partying, and she thought her parents would be more sympathetic of her failing grades if she were, say, raped instead of, doing Molly and getting drunk 24/7. Women make rape. Yep, exactly. Women cheat, so they say they were raped instead. So that's usually what's going on.
And there was the woman in New York. I think her name was Bernie, Birny, whose friends got angry at her because she got in a car with a stranger and left a club and went and had sex with him. She claimed it was rape so that her friends wouldn't get mad at her. And he did 4 years in prison, during which he was assaulted.
But all of this just goes to the individual who makes the false rape claim. I think it's important to emphasize, again, we have a group of predominantly women, predominantly feminists, who are lying about rape on a grand scale with phony statistics, because there's money in that, just like there's money in the phony statistics on domestic violence. And I just wanted to repeat that. And are those people responsible for phony statistics? 1 in 4, 1 in 5, 1 in whatever bullshit number they've come up with, because they're all bullshit. Are those? What's the personality defect there? Well, I think sociopathy and greed primarily. Although maybe some of them actually believe they're bullshit, but sociopathy and
doesn't make it any better.
No, well, sociopathy and greed.
I don't know if stupid is a personality disorder, but I wouldn't discount some of that. But I think you make a good point that the rape lies extend far past than pointing a finger at one guy and saying he raped me when he didn't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to try another segue because there's more feminist insanity for Paul's story. Artificial wombs, a womb with a view. Feminists are talking. They are losing their collective minds on the batshit banana pants bubble over the prospect of artificial wombs and men being able to procreate without having to marry the golden uteri.
Yes, it is estimated that within 30 years that you too will be able to have a gestation box in your closet somewhere where you can just deposit the needed chemicals and egg and spermatozoa, and presto bingo.
Your own easy bake oven.
Easy bake children. And here's the deal. This shit is happening. Mm-hmm. It is not a matter of conjecture or whether or not people think it's going to be possible. It's already theoretically possible. There are a few steps away in technology, but it is going to happen. And as Dr. T alluded to, feminists, is particularly second-wave feminists who understand the power of gestation and motherhood, are losing their fucking minds over it.
Here's what I loved about... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, you'd think it would be the other way around, right? No poor woman will ever be forced again.
Oh, no. This is the conundrum. This is the conundrum. They want to find a way to capitalize on the artificial womb. I don't have to take time off my career. I'm not going to get fat. I can, keep drinking during the gestation period. I don't have to be inconvenienced at all to give birth. On the other hand, they don't want men to benefit from it either. So this article, I think it was in the Daily Beast or maybe Salon, the writer, who is clearly a feminist, was talking about how the men's rights movement were already hailing this as freedom. And it's like, well, yeah, it is.
Goddamn right.
It is.
Right.
I also have to point out, in all fairness, and much to the dismay of some feminists, I'm sure, but you betcha, there's a huge chasm here between second and third wave feminists. Second wave feminists are seeing this as, oh my God, this is the end of women. It's the end of our power. We can control men with marriage, but what really gives us control over men is the children, right? Mm-hmm. But if men take that on as an autonomous task, then that effectively ends a lot of the sway that women have over men. Third wave, just like Dr. T said, are saying, wow, I can have a baby in my closet and I can still party and I can drink and do drugs and screw whoever I want and it's all going to be fine. Of course, these are the same women that won't fucking take care of the kid after it's born. But it is still... there is a division being created by the idea of an artificial womb between people who are still seeking power through motherhood and women who are seeking whatever they want at the moment. And I think this is going to be the fodder of a lot of material to come. I think there's going to be a lot of discussion about this, and I do support the idea. I think that reproductive autonomy for men is an incredible advance that will, in effect, end a lot of women's power over men in lives.
Let me tell you, we talk about women getting baby rabies and having their biological clocks go up and suddenly they want to have kids. The fact of the matter is an awful lot of men want to have kids too. It's right. Just an awful lot of them. I mean, it hit me. I was sure I didn't want to hit kids until one day all of a sudden I realized I really wanted to be a father. I don't know what went off in my head that made that happen, but it did happen to me. Men get it too, is all I'm saying. And I know there are those scoffing and saying that this is decades and decades away. You may be right, but I'm actually going to go on record here and say I think 30 years is a pessimistic estimate, and we're going to see it a lot sooner than 30 years. I would bet much closer to 20. If not even faster than that. And the excuse will actually be, by the way, to help women. You know that, right? It will be to help women.
To reduce death rates and for women who give birth, but in reality, this procedure is probably going to be so expensive that the women who are most at risk of dying in childbirth aren't going to be able to afford an artificial womb anyway. So let's face it, the first groups of women who will make use of this technology are the overprivileged, rich white women who don't want to, increase from a size 2 to a size 6. That's right.
Or who just plain can't because there's a problem.
Right.
And so they need an artificial womb because they can't use their real one. So it will come in and since it helps these poor women, it will come. It won't be stoppable because society won't put up with women who are unhappy. So yeah. Well, we've used up most of our hour. I feel very guilty because there's a story I wanted to get in, so I'm going to at least mention this. And maybe we'll talk about it more next week. Maybe something will change. We don't have a lot of time to discuss it, but shock of shocks, Boko Haram has killed 28 boys and kidnapped 97 boys. And this happened 3 days ago, and there is still no international Bring Back Our Boys campaign. Why do you suppose that is? I'll leave that as an exercise for the audience to ponder.
I think perhaps the reason it hasn't been covered is because Elizabeth Vargas is back in rehab and hasn't had a chance to get to it.
That's why we don't care about bringing back those boys. Of course, that must be what it is. I'm sorry. We're giving short shrift to a really and we're laughing at a really horrible story.
It deserves coverage, and we will be discussing it more. But suffice it to say, 97 boys kidnapped, 28 murdered. Not much. That's page 9 shit. No hashtags. No great attention. After all, they're boys that can be replaced. And there's always a possibility that next week sometime that a girl might be inconvenienced. And so we better save the column space.
That's right. All right, guys, should we close up this week?
I have nothing more to say except I want to wish Elizabeth Vargas the very best in her retread trip back to the thing. I want to make a slight comment on this, and honestly, I know it seems like I'm taking shots at her, but I am somebody that has a little bit of experience with dealing people who are struggling with addictions. One of the ways that most treatment centers will operate, not all of them, but most of them will operate, is on 12-step based philosophy. Even if they're not strictly 12-step based program, they will adopt a lot of philosophy from that program because it does seem to have a positive impact for a lot of people. One of the tenets of that is that recovery from alcoholism requires and demands living a life of rigorous honesty. That you can't live lies constantly and not have your conscience catch up with you and trigger relapses. Very fucking hard to do in your business, Elizabeth. And that's all I have to say.
Could be easier. Just learn what journalists used to know. Dr. Tuya, any closing thoughts for this week?
Nope.
Okay, if you are in an abusive relationship or think you might be with a woman, please check out the services of Dr. Cara Palmatier at shrinkformen.com. That is shrinkformen.com. Even if you can't afford her individual one-on-one sessions, she has an excellent forum in there with people who are going through things just like you are and many useful articles. You should check it out. Furthermore, if you're interested in men's issues in general, please look at what's going on the front pages of avoiceformen.com. Carnell Smith's presentation in the International Conference on Men's Issues is up there. We're arguing about libertarianism on the front page and whether it's a necessary component of the men's movement. Lots of fun stuff happening. Go check it out, and we'll see you all next week.